Welcome everyone to this King's Policy Institute webinar on the knowledge economy relationship between the UK and India. I'm Joe Johnson, visiting professor here at King's, and I'm delighted to introduce the distinguished experts lined up to consider a report which I co-authored with Shashank Vera of Hearth Advisors in Delhi, Jonathan Grant of Different Angles, as well as Jonathan Adams, Chief Scientist at the Institute for Scientific Information of Clarivate, and Janet Lieber, Founder and Director of Education Insights. We have with us today Sir Steve Smith, the long-standing Vice Chancellor of Exeter University and consigliere to many a minister, who is now the UK government's international education champion. And we will have joining us in a minute when he comes from a speech, Lord Karen Bilateral, President of the CBI and of the UK Council of International Student Affairs, who is a passionate champion of the UK-India relationship and of international student mobility. We're honoured also to have Professor Harsh Pant, Head of the Strategic Studies Programme at the Observer Research Foundation in Delhi, and Professor of International Relations with King's India Institute. Lastly, we have two of the co-authors I just mentioned, Jonathan Adams of Clarivate and Janet Lieber of Education Insights. So I'm going to say a few words about why we produced this report and headline some of its main findings before inviting each of our panelists to comment, and then we'll have some questions from our substantial online audience. So this report is a companion paper to an earlier report the same group of authors, more or less, produced on China, which was called The China Question: Managing Risks and Maximizing Benefits from Our Partnership in Higher Education and Research. That paper had identified significant dependencies on China in our universities and science base, and it provides really the context for our reflections now on the state of our knowledge economy relations with India. Needless to say, China is an increasingly powerful actor in international education and research. It accounts for 2 out of every 9 international students in the UK and about a quarter of UK education exports, making it our single biggest market for our most important services export. On the research side, on its current trajectory, China is on track to become the dominant global research power. Its R&D spending has grown 4-fold in the past 10 years to overtake that of the US and the European Union. It has risen up the ranks of the UK's research partners at an astonishing rate, going from 9th place to 2nd place in a decade, and it's set on current trends potentially to overtake the US as the UK's leading research partner. And this is a stunning development that is all the more remarkable for being so unexamined in public policy terms. UK-China collaborations are increasingly central to maintaining the UK's position as a leading knowledge economy. Our last report found that in 20 subject areas, collaborations with China account for more than 20% of the UK's high-impact research, and in 3 very big fields, automation and control systems, telecommunications and material science, collaborations with China represent more than 30% of such output. The depth of the knowledge economy relationship with China brings great benefits, but of course it also brings increasingly well understood risks, and these include the lack of resilience of our higher education system and of individual institutions within it, arising from the dependence of income flows from students from one country. This dependence is compounded by the web of cross-subsidies within UK higher education funding, which mean that structurally loss-making research activities are underpinned by these same fee-paying international students. The exceptionally high share of the UK's research output in key scientific domains that is undertaken in collaboration with scientists from one country is another risk, as is the associated threat to freedom of speech, academic freedom, and institutional autonomy from dependence on a techno-authoritarian one-party state. So our last report proposed both institution level and system level mechanisms to help stakeholders understand and manage these significant sets of risks. And the idea of that report was to answer the China question we posed, to avoid a sort of tendency to answer it in a binary way, as if there was no middle ground possible between naive embrace on the one hand and defiant disengagement and decoupling on the other. It had an impact. One of the central ideas taken forward by the government since then was that it should publish an annual risk assessment of the UK's dependence on third countries across different areas of research and operate a kind of traffic light system to warn policymakers of overdependence in particular areas. This is a task now being undertaken by a new Office for Science and Technology Strategy in the Cabinet Office, chaired by the UK's Chief Scientific Advisor. Another idea taken forward was the creation of a new body. This has been called the Research Collaboration Advice Team, to help researchers make the most of their international collaborations whilst helping them to protect themselves from those who seek to compromise the UK's national security. And so to India. One of the China report's key recommendations was for the UK government, research funding agencies, higher education regulators, sector bodies, and universities themselves to take a much more purposeful and proactive approach to diversification. And this latest King's College London paper aims to contribute to that process. If there is one country today with the human capital and economic potential to equal China and to become a knowledge partner of comparable importance to the UK, it is, of course, India. The UK and India have shared democratic values that underpin their modern relationship. But in crucial respects, the bilateral picture has, over the years, been something of a disappointment. Judged by the crucial trade yardstick, for example, the two countries have become relatively less important to each other over time. The UK is now only the 14th most important trading partner for India, having been second as recently as 1999. Commentators on the post-Cold War UK-India relationship have long been looking for a game changer that would enable the two countries to fulfill more of their huge promise. Now, two game changers have come along at once: the emergence of a more assertive China and the need in the UK to develop a set of strategic partnerships on the world stage post-Brexit, which embody the global Britain idea. There is now a seemingly mutual desire to make things happen that is palpable to seasoned observers of Delhi-London dynamics. As part of this process, India and the UK have just launched negotiations on a free trade agreement with the goal of an early harvest agreement in months to come. And this will fulfill a key element of the Roadmap 2030, the plan set out by the two prime ministers to revitalize bilateral ties and pave the way for a comprehensive strategic partnership. This paper examines how a comprehensive knowledge partnership could provide a much needed focus for these efforts to deepen bilateral ties. It explores how the UK, as part of its advertised tilt towards the Asia-Pacific region, could deploy its knowledge assets, notably its universities and its research base, in a more strategic way with a country destined by its sheer size to play a crucial role in the geopolitics of the 21st century. The first section of the paper focuses on the contribution that the UK, through its universities, can make to human capital formation in India, home to the world's largest youthful population under the age of 25, with about 600 million people in that age group. India's demographic dividend has the potential to be the country's main source of economic growth over coming decades. But whether it fulfills that potential depends in very large part on raising average levels of educational attainment. Completing upper secondary education has become a minimum requirement for young adults navigating the modern economy. Yet the share of 25 to 34-year-olds who leave school without completing upper secondary education is higher in India than in any country in the world, at just over 2/3, compared with an OECD average of 15%. India's new national education policy proposes major reforms to address India's human capital challenges. Among its many objectives, the bulk of which focus on primary and secondary education, It aims to improve the quality of domestic higher education institutions, ensure that India is recognized in its own right as a global education hub, and to double the gross enrollment ratio in higher education to 50% by 2035. This goal for gross enrollment is a challenging one. To create enough university and college leavers for 1 in 2 school leavers will mean a massive increase in seat capacity, and recent growth in HE enrollment has, however, clearly not been matched by increases in public expenditure, and that imbalance is having a negative impact on quality and the student experience, as well as on learning outcomes and in the employability of many graduates. Implementation of the NEP will be a major undertaking. In the meantime, capacity constraints and quality issues mean that there will be continuing push factors behind outbound student mobility. These explain why India is today the second largest source country for globally mobile students, with around 500,000 pursuing learning opportunities overseas each year, 10 times more than the 50 or so thousand students that India welcomes from other countries. This 1 to 10 inward to outward mobility ratio highlights major imbalances in the early internationalization of India's higher education system. In sharp contrast to the way in which China has made education a central part of its Belt and Road initiative and become the world's 4th largest recipient of international students, India doesn't feature today in the list of the top 15 destination countries, notwithstanding the enormous potential of great global brands that exist in India, such as, for example, its IITs. In recognition of this acute supply-side bottleneck in domestic provision and its lack of institutions high up global rankings, the government of India intends to expand and consolidate existing higher education institutions, to create a new cadre of world-class universities, and to that end has designated 20 institutions, so-called institutions of eminence, who will have a significant degree of regulatory autonomy. The NEP also proposes measures to liberalize India's regulatory environment for foreign education provision on Indian soil. It aims to attract top 100 universities to set up branch campuses and other kinds of tie-ups with local institutions. Admittedly, when similar measures have been proposed in the past, they've encountered both domestic opposition and limited enthusiasm from Western institutions who've been concerned about the cost of establishment, the difficulty of repatriating revenues, formidable regulatory barriers at multiple levels of government, and threats to institutional autonomy and academic freedom. And these initiatives have consequently stalled. This time, however, things may well be different, given the strong political commitment from Prime Minister Modi himself to the implementation of the NEP. The second part of this paper examines the existing bilateral research relationship. It provides a bulk of evidence to support the allocation of increased funding to research collaboration with India, which would accelerate India's rise up the ranks of the UK's R&D partners. There is a research gap here, which increased funding for bilateral collaboration can help bridge, and in the report's findings, in a way that delivers significant value for money. The report notes that UK-India collaborative research is not only of higher average field-weighted citation impact than the UK's own research average, strikingly, since 2010, it has also been of higher average impact than the UK's collaborative research with China. Enhancing India's overall research capacity and increasing the internationalization of the country's university system is a key goal of the NEP. Prime Minister Modi has described a need to revolutionize the landscape of Indian science, technology, and innovation. Initiatives to this end include the establishment of a new national funding agency, the NRF, and a new science and technology strategy, which aims to double the number of researchers and spending on R&D every 5 years, and to see India emerge as one of the top 3 scientific superpowers in the next decade. The UK has a clear interest in supporting India as it works to achieve those objectives. The report finally outlines a number of key building blocks that would enable the 2 countries to put in place such a comprehensive knowledge partnership. I'm going to allow Jonathan and Janet to go into some of those recommendations, perhaps in their remarks. But I think we've had enough from me in terms of the context for this report. And I'd like now to ask the first of our panelists to offer some comments on the UK-India knowledge relationship as it stands today and of its potential to develop in the years ahead. And the first person who we're going to go to is Professor Sir Steve Smith. Steve.
Thanks very much indeed. Well, as the UK's international education champion, it's a real privilege to be invited to join this group of esteemed experts. Can I also say how valuable I found the China report and the India report? I think they're both incredibly balanced and insightful reports, and I've certainly used them a lot in my work. But today really is a great platform to have an open discussion on the UK-India relationship and build the foundations to take that relationship further. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'll speak for about 6 minutes so that you don't panic over the timing. So my role supports the UK government's international education strategy. Through the strategy, the UK government is committed to growing the value of education exports with 2 key targets to be achieved by 2030. Firstly, to increase education exports to £35 billion a year from 19.7 billion in 2016-17, and hosting at least 600,000 international HE students in the UK by 2030, but up from 475,000 in 2018-19. Now, the first ambition is progressing well. Latest data for 2019-20 shows exports are now 25.2 billion. And rather embarrassingly, the second target has been met 9 years early. So obviously the target was too low. In 2020, 2021, there were 605,130 international students studying in the UK. I think this demonstrates the UK's ongoing appeal for international students, but crucially, it's important to build on this momentum. So I was appointed to support delivery of these ambitions. I spear overhead activity, open up international opportunities, develop strong international relationships for new and established markets, and crucially, help to tackle market barriers and challenges. So I try and open up export growth opportunities for the UK education sector in order to forge lasting global connections. India is one of my 5 priority countries alongside Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. And in focusing on these 5 priority markets, my role will support the government's ambition to diversify education export growth, including international students. And the latest data shows the growth potential of these 5 countries. Students from India in 2020-21, students increased by 52%, and from Nigeria by 64%. So you can see the aim, and India is clearly now as the number 2, as Joe said, with 84,500 international Indian students studying in the UK. India is increasingly important. Now, what I've tried to do because of the difficulties of traveling is to have a series, maybe about 30 meetings with key stakeholders within Indian higher education. I've had successful virtual meetings with senior figureheads at both state and national level. And I'm about to start a series of visits to India with 2 trips planned between now and May. And they'll be the first 2 of a series where I hope to further the UK-India relationship, both centrally and often neglected comment in the individual states. And so a lot of my meetings will be in states in parts of India. So as the world builds back from COVID, I think it's crucial that we remain outward looking, continue to strengthen our relationships and learn from each other. So what we're trying to do is the UK government is continuing to build deeper government to government partnerships. The governments remain committed to strengthening our relationship with India, and we've made great progress over the years. The partnership, of course, with the region goes beyond education. But of course, as India is one of my priority markets, I was extremely thrilled to learn that only last year our Prime Minister and Prime Minister Modi launched the 2030 roadmap. Through that roadmap, we will elevate the India-UK relationship and guide our cooperation for the next 10 years, covering all aspects of our relationship. But of course, the roadmap explicitly referenced education and committed us to expand cooperation between our higher education systems, working towards mutual recognition of academic qualifications and support and promote the two-way mobility of a greater number of students, teachers and researchers. And as Joe said, there's a lot we can learn from each other. India's national education policy both demonstrates its commitment to a high quality education system with equitable access that is second to none. And one area where I see enormous potential for UK-India collaboration is transnational education and the impact it can make on higher education in India and for the Indian future economy. As set out in the updated 2021 International Education Strategy, the UK government is committed to supporting the sustainable growth of transnational education, whether delivered by colleges or universities. I see this as a very important aspect of internationalization for institutions, so students can study high quality degrees offered in collaboration with UK universities at home. We see both transnational education programs delivered in country and the UK continuing to attract Indian students to study in the UK as important and complementary pillars of internationalization. As you'll be aware, the UK has launched and begun trade negotiations with India, which is one of the world's largest and fastest growing economies. A deal could create huge benefits for both countries. Colleagues from the Department of International Trade started negotiations with India last month, and the shape and scope of the FTA will be confirmed at an appropriate point in the negotiations. Supporting UK-based companies to operate overseas will become ever more important as we forge new trading relationships around the world. So finally, collaboration in our higher education sectors has an obvious great benefit. Not only does it inspire students to become global citizens and facilitate new and innovative educational provision, but by stimulating new research and innovation partnerships, it also allows us to come together to tackle shared societal challenges, such as climate change, or as we've seen over the last 2 years, global public health issues. So going forward, I aim to work on our ongoing relationship with India and build lasting connections. I look forward to discussing today all we can achieve in India and its great potential in the future ahead. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve. We're all very, very lucky to have you doing the job you're doing as international education champion. I don't think anybody could be working harder in that role than you are. Turning then to our next panelist, I think Janet Lieber, will you come in and say a few words?
Thank you, Joe. And I'm truly delighted to be part of this important conversation about the UK-India higher education relation. I would like to start with elaborating on Joe's remark about India's demographic dividend and also reiterate that it is, yes, the second largest sending country for international students, but equally it is the second largest tertiary education system in the world. With its 36.5 million tertiary education students, India enrolls almost as many learners in its universities as North America and Western Europe combined. Outbound student mobility from India accelerated significantly over the past 5 years, when the numbers of internationally mobile students more than doubled across the world from 216,000 to almost 500,000 in 2019. And in that context, I'd like to also mention that the world's average growth in globally mobile students over that period of time was 35% compared to 114 of Indian students. Equally, the country's outbound mobility rate increased significantly from 0.7 to 1.31, which indicates that the growth in study abroad significantly outpaced the expansion of the country's higher education system. The UK was a relatively newcomer to this development, and growth in student numbers to the UK only started to rebound in 2018-19. When the announcement of the reintroduction of post-study work was announced. In that context, I would like to also set the challenging environment for international students and institutions in the UK and how much things have changed over the past 3 years. The pressures on students from India have mounted and they came from all sides. The post-study work route was discontinued in 2012, which led to a collapse in the number of enrollments. The visa policy changes had a major impact on education institutions that were active in India, and they were impacted by the changes in the sponsors' refusal rate that was initially set at 20% in 2012 and then 10% in 2014. Over 300 education institutions lost their license or had their license revoked over the space of 1 year only. Universities were discouraged from recruitment in countries with high visa refusal rates that may push them beyond their highly trusted sponsors' refusal thresholds. And as such, they redirected efforts to China and East Asia, and we saw the UK's growing reliance on one country only. Student visa applications hit their lowest point in 2015 when they dropped by 80% compared to their peak levels in 2009. But as part of that recruitment ecosystem, education agents who advised international students were also impacted. They saw that their efforts generated better returns if they sent students elsewhere, like Canada and Australia. In addition to that, economic factors were at play, and we saw exchange rate depreciations and falling gold prices mounted economic pressures on demand from India. And as a result, many Indian students couldn't meet the visa requirements for financial support. And this is what explains, is one of the key explanations behind the high visa refusal rates. I would now like to turn the attention on to the benefits of hosting international students from India in the UK. As Sir Steve Smith pointed, we've seen huge expansion of Indian students over the past year, and the UK now hosts more than 84,000 Indian students in its universities. They make significant contribution to many STEM-related subjects. Indian students represent about a fifth of the non-EU students in the UK at present. At the master's level, where they're highly concentrated, they represent more than half of the population in computer science, information systems, and software engineering. In other areas of STEM, such as engineering and mechanical engineering, they represent 44 and 45% respectively. They're highly valued students, but however, they're very responsive to post-study work opportunities, scholarships, tuition fee waivers. And in that context, I would like to reiterate the commitment of the UK universities to doctoral students from India. And this is evidenced by the high proportion of Indian PhD students who have their tuition fees either waived or sponsored by UK universities. 41% of all the full-time PhD researchers from India who started their degree in 2019-20 had their studies funded by their hosting UK university. National level support for Indian PhD students is likely to increase the popularity of the UK for Indian researchers. Double and dual PhDs are another cost-effective way to gain a doctoral degree in the UK. Steve mentioned earlier the huge importance that transnational education brings, not just to the UK, but all the countries that the UK delivers its higher education in. Dual PhDs bring additional benefits of the much needed capacity to build in India, India needs to meet its NEP targets, but also it forges close research ties between the two countries. Beyond the double PhDs and collaborative teaching, there are also the wider range of transnational education offers opportunities to widen access to higher education degree, but also it contributes to reduced inequalities, support for local knowledge development, and its evidence shows that it counteracts brain drain by attracting talent and students to the location of delivery. Mutual recognition of credits and qualifications enables two-way flow of students between the two countries. stronger UK-India higher education relations are likely to bring huge benefits to both countries, also to their students, to their institutions, and the broader communities that surround these education ties. I thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Janet. Jonathan, over to you. Jonathan Adams.
Thank you very much, Joe. Well, you've already covered a number of the key points, and thank you very much for introducing those. One of the things I'd like to say is that it's been terrifically useful to be part of this project, because I have had a number of briefings from Shashank Vera, who Joe mentioned earlier on, who has been incredibly informative about the Indian research system, the Indian higher education system, and certainly I would encourage those reading the report to have a look at the detail that's available on that, because I think from a UK point of view there is quite a lot to be learned. The foundations of the Indian higher education system are older than many of our universities. The University of Calcutta and the University of Mumbai were founded in 1857. I'm in Leeds at the moment. The University of Leeds was part of the Victoria University that wasn't founded until 1887. So there's a definite history there. It's the 8th largest country globally by output, as Joe mentioned. It has a much lower resource density, researcher density, than many other countries. But if we look at its productivity, then the number of Indian researchers compared to output is as productive as, for example, Germany, which is important. But its investment, its gross expenditure on R&D is less than 1%, which means that resources are very thinly spread across the system, and that is undoubtedly a constraint on actually realizing some of the potential that, as Joe indicated, it clearly has. The UK has long been a close partner of India in research. It's well ahead of other European countries. It's currently the third on bilateral papers, because South Korea has been expanding its technology collaboration with India, but it's second, as Joe mentioned, if we take into account multilateral papers as well. And the information here is drawn from Clarivate's Web of Science, which gives us a 40-year view on that UK-India relationship and just how close it's been and how networked UK universities are. One of the issues, I think, for the UK universities, which I believe will be addressed by the initiatives that Joe referred to on the part of the Indian government, is that the Indian research system is really quite specialized. The portfolios of a lot of the leading institutions are more narrow than they are with the big civic universities in the UK. And that does mean that universities may need to have, UK universities may need a wider range of partners in India in order to cover their research footprint than they would do in other countries. The consolidation of that system and the promotion of excellence in a limited number of world-leading institutions will undoubtedly be a significant benefit to furthering the relationship. India's portfolio is somewhat different to the UK's. It's more focused on technology, and that's one of the reasons why it's engaging closely with China. But with the UK, it's very focused on the areas that Steve was referring to: biomedical sciences, and environment in relation to climate change. And that's where the UK has great strengths and capacity. And so there are very big opportunities by working with India to get different perspectives and have access to quite different resources from those that we would have in the UK. And underpinning the public health system is clearly a major benefit there. Joe talked about funding. We've looked at cooperative funding systems before. I remember back in the early 2000s with Gareth Roberts looking at ways in which we might be able to jointly fund UK-US research projects. It's always been a problem for the UK system, but it is in fact very beneficial. And the great thing here is that by securing a joint pot with India, we will also be securing funds for those joint projects. because it has been a constraint on India researchers that with a very thinly spread resource system, there's not always the resources available to deliver the full benefits of what are hugely promising projects. So by drawing in resources jointly, we will be promoting the very best of research on both sides. And I think that that will give us enormous benefits. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Jonathan. Okay, so Harsh, it's over to you now. Professor Harsh Pant from the Observer Research Foundation in Delhi.
Thank you, Joe, for having me part of this very, very interesting and important conversation. And let me congratulate all the authors, including the three who are present with us on screen here today. It's a great report. It's a wonderful read. And I think what it does is that it situates some of the more practical issues of education partnership in the larger context of a geopolitical shift, which I think is quite an innovative way of making this argument. And I think, the fact that we are discussing this report at a time when there is certainly, I think Joe mentioned it, there is a new energy in the relationship, which is quite striking. We are even talking of FTO. This is much awaited FTA, which much awaited one. We are talking of a timeline here. We are talking of, we inaugurated it, and then there is a possibility that we will see something concrete emerging out of this, which is quite striking given where we were just a few months back. So I think what tends to happen often in I think India-UK relationship is that there is a lot of focus on history, which is good, which is inevitable by virtue of our relationship. But I think but it carries with it this assumption that that we know each other so well that the relationship will be on an autopilot, that you don't have to actually do much to sustain this relationship. But we know, and I think Joe mentioned it in his remarks, that this how difficult this road has been, and I have often said that India-UK relationship has often lacked ambition. There was hardly any, we used to talk in generic terms, basic issues. Yes, there is mobility, but I think that whatever mobility there was in education, for example, that was also part of a very small strata of the two societies were interacting with each other. And I think as we look at the relationship today, and as we look at the geopolitical and geoeconomic environment today, it has opened up new opportunities to think of this education partnership in very ambitious terms. And I think Sir Steve's comments, Joe's comments, and in this report, both Jonathan and Janet have talked about extensively as to the kind of doors it opens us to think anew about something that we knew is a very important part of this relationship. We always knew that education is very important, but there was something missing. And that missing part was, I think, the larger relationship itself, that it was just not getting into the groove. The relationship was not fitting together. India and UK were partners, yes, but they were not partners of the kind that could really push the agenda on research and high-end technology research, for example, education research, towards a new paradigm. And I think in the past, the assumption was, and I think this is again an interesting aspect of contemporary realities, the assumption was that greater engagement on the education front would perhaps alleviate some of the pressures on the strategic front. This idea that, let's engage, let's do people-to-people ties, and that will somehow build the relationship from the bottom up. But I think what is happening today is we are looking at the strategic partnership where the UK-India relationship has undergone a positive transformation. It is at the right moment, perhaps, to talk of the knowledge partnership underpinning that strategic relationship. And that makes a lot of difference because the two leaderships in the two countries, the political leaderships are invested, the bureaucracies are invested, and that has its own impact on the ground. And I think that is a point that I think a number of speakers have also made about new education policy, or be it changes that have happened over the last few years in the British way of looking at India and at the Indian students. Both British foreign policy, Indian foreign policy have undergone, are transforming. Both nations are looking at their relationship with each other, with the world through a very different set of lenses. And perhaps this is what makes this report important, because this is a moment that can be seized by policymakers on both sides to focus on this knowledge partnership aspect of the relationship, and to therefore double down on something that we knew was important, but to take it to a level where we can really push the strategic agenda also as part of this engagement. And there is also something that is very interesting that has happened, which is a word called trust. Trust is back in the diplomatic lexicon in ways that perhaps we had not seen in the past. Trust among countries, working with like-minded countries. Especially when we are talking of high-end technology research, high-end science and tech research. We are looking at this through the prism increasingly of trustworthy nations, how like-minded countries can come together, and therefore India and the UK at this particular moment perhaps are at that vantage point, but this can be exploited to give the relationship, to give the knowledge partnership a new punch. This is, of course, the reporters gives a sense of British priorities, of UK's priorities, and Joe and authors have laid down a white canvas of issues. But on the other side, on the Indian side, I would also underscore that there is no dearth of aspiration. India is evolving, Indians are evolving, I think Indian aspirations are evolving. And so whether you look at it in terms of the expanse of higher education, the demand for higher education, the demand for Indians to go out and study, that has percolated away from metros to smaller cities and smaller towns in India. So the conversation has taken on a very different connotation. As to it's not simply about the 4 metros or 5 big cities in India. It is also a conversation that is happening in aspirational towns and smaller cities in India, which makes, I think, the role that partners like UK can play in that conversation very, very significant. The new education policy, of course, underscores that reality. That it has opened the doors to look at the internationalization of Indian education system, which is not, I think, at a level where it should be, but it sort of, the aspiration is to give it a new stride, to take it a notch higher, and to put funding, and I think the idea being that resources are now not only going to come from the state, but also non-state actors. To tapping into Indian non-state resources is going to be a very major component of the drive for India's education system. And there, I think the public-private partnership and especially the model that UK follows is going to be very important, because there are very, very few other models that actually can help India as it tries to galvanize that aspect of its engagement with the wider education community and its education stakeholders within India. This also leads to this issue of adaptation of the digital technology. Not only in higher education, but yesterday India's finance minister presented a budget for the next year, financial year. And the budget was actually, there was so much in the budget in terms of primary and secondary education, and how Indian government is hoping to use digital technology and technology of other kinds to make it easier for people from all backgrounds to access education at a time when there is great disruption happening in the Indian in all education sectors, I would say. So I think in that context, when you look at NEP, when you look at the aspirations, when you look at how higher education institutions have adjusted to this new reality, there is talk of flexible credit systems where students can engage with multiple educational institutions. There is also possibility of students not registering and using credits from other universities across the board. I think there are possibilities there come in where Britain as a partner, British educational institutions as partners, can play a very, very important role as the digital transformation of India's higher education system it takes on a new turn. And that, I think, allows for a framework, again, that goes beyond select few institutions, select few cities. That has been the norm. We all know big universities in India. We all know big, relatively big stakeholders. But I think taking this conversation beyond them, the lot earlier that I think Jonathan mentioned, University of Calcutta or Chennai University. I think the idea that you have state-run institutions in Indian states which are equally important now in terms of delivery of education. And given the scope of and the scale of India's higher education, there I think the conversations have to be with states, have to be with the institutions that are delivering education at multiple levels in the Indian higher education system. And UK institutions, of course, are there's talk of UK institutions looking to enter India, but I think there is also talk of Indian institutions trying to enter in the UK. IITs, for example, there are discussions happening about whether IITs can set shop here in the UK, and I think that can be something very interesting and very important to look at and to examine and to see what possibilities exist there. And of course, research in new age technologies, which is going to be the driver for the knowledge-based economy that we all basically look at and think of the global economic architecture in those terms increasingly. I think there again the conversations between Indian and UK-based institutions become very important. And the true, in a sense, the true knowledge partnership will not only give a new momentum to India-UK relationship, as this report lays out, but I think it will also make the relationship more sustainable, because I think one of the issues that has been slightly more problematic is that the fundamental question that I think Indians and our British friends have to ask is, do we understand each other, and how well do we know each other? And I think there, despite our historical connect, you will find that there are still big chunks where we don't really understand what's going on in each other, in each other's countries. And there, the engagement with that is based on education partnership will allow us not only deliverables in the education sector, but cutting across education in several sectors, domain-specific awareness that comes with this expansive engagement, I think will lay the foundations of a much more sustainable India-UK partnership, knowledge or otherwise. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Harsh. Great to have your perspectives on this, and I'm delighted that you mentioned the plans for the IITs to set up in the UK, or to consider exploring setting up in the UK. That's an incredibly exciting initiative, which I'm sure institutions across the UK will be wanting to explore with them. We've been joined now by Lord Bilateral. Karen, it's great to have you, and we'd love to get your views on the report and on your reflections on what you've heard from Harsh, Steve, Janet, and Jonathan. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Joe. Can you see me and hear me clearly?
Totally.
Marvelous. I'm speaking to you from the Indian High Commission in London. I've just been speaking in the session on the budget, the Indian budget, which Harsh just referred to. And I'm delighted. First of all, congratulations, Joe, to you and everyone involved in your report, building a natural partners, building a comprehensive UK-India knowledge partnership. I mean, it's a really great, comprehensive, detailed report full of rich suggestions, but I will now comment on some of it. I speak to you wearing various hats. So one is as president of the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, also as the founding chair of the UK-India Business Council, the chancellor of the University of Birmingham, Russell Group University, and with very strong links to India, which I will come to just now, and president of the UK Council for International Student Affairs. It looks after the interests of all the international students in the UK, the co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on International Students, of which Joe is an illustrious officer, and in my roles as a fellow at Sydney Sussex at Cambridge, a fellow at Kellogg College at Oxford, and a fellow of Oxford University at the Said Business School. So I'm very involved in higher education.
Well, Karen, we may have lost you temporarily. Until we get Karen back, I think we should carry on and start sort of maybe enter the Q&A section of our conversation, and then when Karen returns, we can go back to him. But Steve, I want to maybe pick up with you on a point that you made in your remarks, which was a decade ahead of schedule, the UK has met its targets for international student recruitment, which were to host at least 600,000 students by 2030. And the HESA data, which came out a few days ago, found that we met that target in the academic year 2020-2021. What does that say about our level of ambition for our global education sector?
Well, 2 points. Firstly, Joe, I think it shows it's unabashed good news. I mean, in the height of the pandemic, we broke the target. Even, in my wildest dreams, I didn't think that would happen that quickly. I think we have to be very wary of complacency, though, because Australia and the US were in very complicated situations at that time, and that's changed. And secondly, I think we must not underestimate the changes to the patterns of international higher education. Several panelists have commented on it, but the ed tech link, I work with all these different governments, and the thing is, Joe, very few of them come to us and say, we want to send more students to the UK. Most of them say, we need help in building the skills base. And that can't be done only through putting people on planes. So I'm very, very aware of the TNE side of things, 450,000 transnational students studying outside the UK. By the way, if you add them together, it means we're over 1 million students now. I mean, that is incredible. So I think we need to probably expand the target. We need to think about how we can achieve more. But I think the 600,000 almost covers up the fact that a lot of the future growth will be in that route, but it'll also be through transnational education, through the involvement of public-private partnerships, through the expansion of ways in which students can benefit from UK education. The 1.2 billion a year that comes from schools who have students abroad. There's lots of other sources of income and activity. So for me, it's about seeing in the totality that we've only really begun a journey that should lead us to a much more significant involvement of students around the world studying UK education, both in the UK, but also with other partners.
Very, very, very helpful, Steve. Thank you for that. So I think we can now see Lord Bilamori again. Yeah. Karen, we can see you.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. And we had your introductory remarks fine, but then you cut off just after you ended with the Oxford reference.
Yes, so that's perfect time to have ended. I'm sorry, I've had to switch devices because the other one is just stopped working. So I'm as long as this is working, we'll work with this.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. So to continue, the backdrop of the enhanced relationship, I think this is a new era of the Indo-British partnership that we've just emerged into with the enhanced trade partnership last year to double the trade between our two countries by 2030. And by the way, the trade between our two countries is not very high. I've been very involved with the Australian Free Trade Agreement, with the rolling over of all the EU bilateral agreements like Canada. Our bilateral trade of about 24 billion pounds. Well, Australia, a country tiny in population compared with India, is 22 billion pounds. Canada is over 20 billion pounds. So, the potential is absolutely huge. And the FTA, the Free Trade Agreement, the official negotiations have now launched last month, and I think it's going to be very important, also encompassing the education area. Collaboration has been a big theme through the pandemic, and I just want to highlight the example, the power of university, business, and government working together with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And yesterday I had a meeting with the Swedish ambassador, and of course, AstraZeneca is a British-Swedish company. And headquartered where? In Cambridge. And who have they partnered with? With the Serum Institute of India, with my fellow Zoroastrian Parsi dear friends, the Poonawallahs. And the Serum Institute of India, that one factory in Pune, thanks to their association with Oxford and of course AstraZeneca, it has produced over 1.5 billion doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine. So this is the power of cross-country collaboration. I think the focus on tech, India's huge when it comes to ed tech, when it comes to the whole climate change after COP26, India with solar power, the UK with wind power. The potential to collaboration is huge, creating more jobs. And of course, we've got another example. As the Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, I remember we won a Queen's Award for our railway department. And you get that award at Buckingham Palace. And this was a few years ago. And I remember Prince Charles came around and I joked with him and I said, Your Royal Highness, one day we're working in Birmingham on a hydrogen-powered train. We'll power the royal train with hydrogen. And we all laughed. And fast forward, and I went and saw this model train that we built. It started as a student project, a PhD student project in 2012. We got to COP26, and the University of Birmingham's Hydroflex, the world's first retrofitted hydrogen-powered train, was up and running in Glasgow. Prince Charles was on that train. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, was on the train, and I chaired a meeting of transport experts from around the world on that train, moving from Glasgow station. And it was brilliant. And that's British university innovation, but it could not have happened on its own. Innovate UK, the government helped finance it. Porterbrook, the rolling stock company, did the retrofitting, and 30 companies, including Siemens, were involved in this groundbreaking innovation. So the power of doing that with the UK and India, I think, is going to be huge. Another thing, to put this in the context, the integrated review that we've just had in the UK, the first such review of our defense, strategic, diplomatic, security, all in one. And it's a tilt to the Indo-Pacific. And I love that. It's no longer Asia-Pacific, it's Indo-Pacific. And of course, the growth in that area, including India, is going to be huge. Last week, the IMF announced that India is going to be the fastest growing major economy in the world with a 9% growth rate. And by the way, one of the things quite pertinent to the budget, India, for the second time running in this budget just now, has not increased any taxes. And I say, our Indian origin chancellor, please do listen. Don't increase taxes. India is the proof that if you don't increase taxes, you get a growth rate of 9%. So I think that India is doing a lot of things right. Collaborative research, I want to make this point. I've seen this again with the Birmingham example. When we've got about 40 projects with India, with Indian universities at any one time. When we do the field-weighted impact of collaborative research on our own, let's use a figure of 2.3. We do field-weighted impact with another university in India, for example, let's say that's 1.7. Together, when we do a project together, it goes up to 5.2. So it's a multiple, the field-weighted impact, when you do cross-border collaborative research. And I think the potential for that is going to be absolutely huge. The alumni that it created when foreign students come and study at universities like Birmingham, got thousands of alumni in India, including the former cabinet secretary, Ajit Seth. We have collaborations with institutions that I've spoken about as well. We've got the Guru Nanak chair that with the Indian government at the University of Birmingham in Sikh studies. We do work on sustainable cooling just now and air pollution in India. And our School of Law is also partnering along with the British Council as well. So I think that the report in particular is fantastic, your report. It sees the economic ties seem at a lower risk of geopolitical disruption than ties with China if we're with India, and there's no running away from that. That the potential is huge. And of your five, if you've summarized your 5 building blocks, the mutual recognition is a very important point. To this day, India does not recognize our 1-year masters. And I was for 5 years the chair of the Cambridge University Judge Business School, one of the top business schools in the world. And our MBA is a 1-year MBA. In fact, the top ranked MBA in the world usually, quite often nowadays, is INSEAD. I don't know, Joe, did you go to INSEAD if I'm not mistaken? Yeah. So INSEAD's a 1-year MBA and it's ranked #1 in the world. Now, it's no less than a 2-year MBA. It's just condensed into the 1 year. So if the Indian government could recognize our 1-year masters, then the second pillar of an ambitious goal of doubling the student numbers from India. Well, Steve over here, our champion for international students. We know the APPG, we recommended when we produced our report in 2018, set a target for international students. We set a target of government listened, 600,000. And Steve, you corrected me last time, but I think the latest is we've crossed that 600,000. But the Indian students are much, much lower than the number of Chinese students. And the report makes a very important point, something I've been speaking about for a long time, that India is still not in the low-risk country list, whereas China is. India needs to be added to that low-risk country list. The 2-year post-graduation work visa was another major recommendation of ours. That is there now, 3 years for PhD, which is excellent. And we've got to see the number of Indian students now continuing to increase. Your third recommendation of a loan funding program. This is brilliant. This would enable so many more Indian students to be able to come and study over here. The Turing scheme. Turing scheme is a great scheme, but to compare it with the Erasmus in Europe, where there was a free movement both ways, the Turing scheme is only one way. We need to enhance the Turing scheme to be both ways and much more effective. The fifth one that you had is to increase funding for collaborative research and development. And I've just spoken about that in the huge power. And finally, the last 2 points I want to make, IITs that have been touched on. Great news that India is now thinking of the Indian IITs, the most prestigious institutions in India, with some of the brightest people coming out of them, now running the biggest companies in the world, to come and partner with UK universities and have a physical presence here in the UK. Birmingham is very interested in this, and I hope other British universities will be as well. In the budget just now, the digital universities Harsh spoke about, that's going to be a really useful thing in India. Again, we could partner on that. We've done so much over here with with the Open University, with digital work that universities in London are doing, like the LSE, and of course the opening up of foreign universities in India. We would be, there's so many universities of ours will be ready to open up in India. And finally, Australia. Just now I was given the update that the Australian government has published its strategy for international education to make them even more competitive. So this is a competition, and Prime Minister David Cameron said this is a global race. We're in this global race together. So thank you again for your report. It's fantastic.
Karen, brilliant to have your insights and perspective. So thank you very much for that. Karen, I'm going to go straight to you with a question, which is that, as you said, we've just hit this target for at least 600,000 students, a decade ahead of schedule. What do you want to do with this target? Do you want to increase it, or do you want to just keep it as it is?
I would want to continue to increase it for a number of reasons. One is Indian students in particular. I think we've got a long way to go to get many more Indian students. And the benefits of international students, why would I want to increase the question? You know, I met a civil servant. In fact, it was the civil servant a few years ago who was in charge of international students at the Home Office. And he asked me, why do you want to increase international student numbers? Do we need to increase international student numbers? So, I was taken aback by that question. And you've got to go to the essence of why is this important? And it's important because not only the revenue that it brings in. So if the figure was 26 billion directly and indirectly when we were about 450,000, do the sums if that increases to now over 600,000 students. The links, generation-long links, I'm an example of that it builds. One of our strongest elements is soft power, world leaders. There are more world leaders that have come out of British universities and American universities than any other countries in the world by miles. The Achieving Scholar Scheme, for example, 30 world leaders come out of that scheme. That only started in the 1980s. So the enriching of the experience of our domestic students, all these reasons are why I would say we need to continue increasing the number of international.
Just to probe, Karen, what do you think the target should be by 2030, now that we've hit the at least 600,000 target?
At the rate we're going, we should go for 1 million. The Australians have already got up to 750,000. And our capability, I would argue, the Australians got great capability with international students, but we should be up there ahead of them. And of course, the Americans are bigger, but we should go for 1 million.
Great. Steve, I want to ask you, if I can, about one specific recommendation in the report, which was around de-risking international student recruitment for universities, with the idea that we learn from what Canada's done, which is how to manage out the risk of fraud in the proof of financial support that international students have to demonstrate. Now, Canada has a scheme called the Student Direct Scheme, whereby students are required to take out a GIC, which is an investment with a bank of around 10,000 Canadian dollars, which they put into escrow for the first year of their studies, and which they draw down upon to support themselves for their maintenance support during the first year. But it solves this problem of agents fraudulently recycling funds and wrongly creating the impression that students have resources to draw upon when in reality they may not. What would stop the UK de-risking recruitment by requiring a GIC certificate from a bank in that way, in the way that Canada does?
I don't think there's anything that would stop it, Joe. I think it's a question of how you balance the potential negative effects of that versus the positive effects. The information I have is that the biggest issue isn't actually the financial one, it's the English language qualification. And in a sense, I think there are various ways that people are looking at to try and solve that. It is still the biggest single concern, I suppose, and you referred to it and others have referred to it, about the nature of the visa regime. We've seen the positive effects. All I can say is that this is a constant source of discussion between bits of UK government, and we are very keen to find ways in which we can reduce the dangers that a problem occurs with visa or financial fraud, which would then damage the relationship. But it is something that colleagues in DIT, DFE and the Home Office UKVI are spending a lot of time talking about. I think at the moment the view is the dangers are less than they have been, but clearly universities will want to be sure that they don't get caught up from this. So I think compared to a few years ago, we can see from the numbers coming through that the number, I mean, 90,000 visas supported, approved in the year to September 2021. I think the problem is less pressing than it was, but it is certainly something that colleagues I work with are discussing all the time. And the proposal you put forward is indeed one that's being looked at, but the key point is making sure that we don't put barriers in the way that then make other countries look more attractive to Indian students.
Got it, thank you. Harsh, I want to come back to the IITs, which is such an exciting development. From your perspective, you know, what's the attraction for the Indian education system of allowing the IITs to expand internationally when the capacity constraints on the number of places they can offer domestically are so acute? Do you see this as complementary and reinforcing of their domestic mission, or do you think it's something which is going to potentially clash with the domestic mission they have in India?
You know, Joe, there's been a deliberate policy in recent years of expanding IIT's role in India itself. If you see the number of IITs, for example, have gone up. There have been some discussions around that, the possibility that this may eventually lead to a decline in quality. But what we have seen instead is some of the smaller, newer IITs have actually done very well. They are doing very well, both in terms of their internationalization of the way they are getting teachers, faculty, and the students, as well as in delivery in terms of output that they are producing in research and development. So I think the expansion of the IIT brand, if you will, domestically has been taking place, and I think this expansion abroad, this expansion beyond India's frontiers is a second part of that, I think, narrative, both because I think IIT is a very, Indian higher education system at one point in time had many brands. Unfortunately, we have seen over the period of time that increasingly we are I think only looking at IITs in the context of global brands. So I think there is an attempt to make sure that the kind of I think Lord Bilateral was talking about collaboration, partnerships that you can have domestically is not limited by the fact that you are only operating in India. If you set up shop abroad, if you can engage with the global stakeholders, then I think that raises both the quality of the product, but also it raises awareness within India about what it means to have a global research agenda or global quality research agenda. And I think that is something that needs to percolate down not only in terms of IIT structures, but also to other higher education institutions in India, which I think is one of the ways in which the new education policy wants to deliver. And I think IITs sort of are, given that they are brand ambassadors at the moment of Indian higher education, that is perhaps the thinking behind it, but also the fact that they have been so successful in both attracting fresh talent as well as engaging with some of the best institutions across the world. So I think this is certainly a next stage in the evolution of the IITs themselves, as well as in some ways of India's education system, higher education system.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a list of UK higher education providers who are interested in this idea and will be making a beeline to the Indian High Commission to see if they can explore it. Karen, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you. Just to add what Harsh just said, that you see, this is taking things to another stage. I remember being on the UK-India roundtable, and we came up with the UKERI initiative, which is joint projects between a UK academic and an Indian academic, and funded. And these are small projects with a few £1,000s funding, but we've done so many of them. It went into phase 1, then into phase 2, and it's been very successful. What this does is we have the IITs partnering with universities, say Birmingham as an example, where you have a physical presence in Birmingham University, where the students, as part of their degrees, engineering degrees, will spend a year in India, and the IIT students will spend a year at Birmingham as part of their degree. So they have that experience, where faculty will be placed at that center, will do collaborative research on a permanent, ongoing basis. So it becomes much more powerful, and it's good for the IIT brand and good for us.
Yeah, and a great symbol of the growing UK-India knowledge relationship. If the first international IITs are in the UK, that would really be something to work for as part of it, as part of this free trade agreement negotiation that's now underway. We're starting to run out of time. I think we've got one more minute. I just want to ask Jonathan, if you had, if you were sitting in Kwasi Kwarteng's shoes as Secretary of State in Bays, and you had the sort of 13 or 14 billion pound research budget under your control, what would you do to take UK-India research relations to the next level?
Well, I think the point that Lord Bilateral just made about exchange is a really important one. It's very much if we want knowledge understanding, if we want to further the engagement of UK universities with Indian institutions, then it's people going backwards and forwards. It's not just having people come here and possibly some people go out. I mean, it's clearly one of the failings of our relationship with China is that it's very much a one-way trade. India doesn't need to be like that. That's where we want to get people moving backwards and forwards. Mutual understanding about not just what research people are doing, but how they do it, how they problem solve, which clearly we see from the Indian research students who are in the UK, they're incredibly good at doing. So we need UK students going out to India and working in laboratories there as well.
Brilliant. Well, we are now out of time. I would like to thank our panelists, Professor Sir Steve Smith, Professor Punt, Lord Bilateral, Jonathan Adams, Janet Lieber. Thank you very much. It's been a really stimulating discussion. Thank you.